Everyone. I'm so glad to have you here today. My name is Cyndy McDonald. I teach for the UCLA College Counseling Certificate Program. I'm an educational consultant. I'm also an entrepreneur, and I've also been a producer of these Friday forums for 5 years, as Luce and I were just talking about. It's hard to believe it was 5 years ago that we started looking at this during COVID and said, how are we going to connect and what is that going to look like? And that's how I started Friday Forums. And here we are 5 years later. And I'm so glad to be able to have interviewed experts in subjects that you care about. I cover education and business, and today we're going to talk about the education side. So, as you're coming into the Friday Forum, go ahead and put your name and your location so that Lewis and I can see where you're coming from. And we're going to have a great conversation this today and talk about our students and as they go get ready to college. Lewis is the former dean of academic advising, and was an associate vice provost for undergraduate education at Stanford University here in California, where I reside. I live in Central California. And Lewis, are you in the Palo Alto area?
We are in the Palo Alto area, yes.
And so that's about a 4 hour difference between where he's located and where I'm located. He also is the former dean of academic advising, associate vice provost for undergraduate education at Stanford University. And at Stanford, his responsibilities included overseeing the undergraduate advising program, which is something we all really care about. And we're going to talk about that more today. New student orientation programs, summer bridge program, and the university's academic progress review system. And during his time at Stanford, he expanded the advising program, which I find very important, promoted a holistic approach to academic advising, and advocated for liberal education, which we all are very strong advocates for as well. So you're kind of like you're singing our song. You're singing our song. You've got an audience that's very
Great.
amenable. He's also the John M. and Elizabeth W. Musser Professor of Religious Studies, emeritus at Carleton College, where he taught for 33 years. But we're not counting, right? Those years went by really fast. And during his tenure at Carleton, he also served as associate dean at the college and the director of the Perlman Center for Learning and Teaching. Louis, I know you're a scholar of Jewish ethics. I've seen a lot of the books that you've written on this topic. You've published several books in this field. Your most recent book, though, is more focused on college. It's Thinking Critically in College, the Essential Handbook for Student Success. And this is published by Radius Group in the year 2023. And it guides students through the transition from high school to college level academic work, which is really, really key. And especially as we're still realizing the impact of COVID on learning and preparation and all, we're still having to look at that even more than in the past. So thank you for being here today. You can see we've got people from DC, Petaluma, Livermore, Irvine, Minneapolis, New Jersey, just all sorts of locations that we all deal with students in coming into this. So thank you for being here and being my guest today.
Thank you for having me, Cindy. It's a pleasure to be here as part of your Friday Forum series.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, I just went through the intro, but give me a little bit more about yourself and how you've worked with students in higher education. Why was that your calling? Why was that drew you to that?
Well, it's interesting. I think it felt like my calling, maybe even when I was in college. I loved learning. I loved being a student. So, on some level, I think I imagined that going on to become a professor would be a little bit like being a perennial student. That appealed to me. That actually turned out to be the case in a way. I mean, there's a lot of other things, of course, that professors do, and a lot of other responsibilities. But teaching and learning is exciting to me, and I've always been drawn to it. I was very fortunate right out of graduate school. I had grown up in Minnesota. I'd gone to the University of Minnesota as an undergrad, and then later as a grad student, and then went off to Brown for my PhD work. And when I finished, I had opportunities to go to a couple of different places, including back to Minnesota to teach at Carleton College, which, as many of your members of your audience will know, is a very, very fine selective liberal arts college in Minnesota. And I had a wonderful career there teaching and working with students. I loved my students. I loved my colleagues on the faculty. It was just a great place. And as time went on, I moved in the latter part of my career into those administrative roles that you mentioned, working in the dean's office, working with the Learning and Teaching Center at Carleton, which is very, very robust. And so I just continued uh, being involved in working with students, working with faculty to help them become better teachers, and then ultimately had an opportunity to move to Stanford to do the work of directing their advising program, which, as you pointed out, included a number of other responsibilities, but primarily it was undergraduate advising. And I'll just say one more word about that, which is that I've always thought of advising as really way more than just helping students pick courses and make sure they graduate on time. That's the very, very bare minimum. But really good advising involves sitting with students, getting to know them, helping them make decisions of all kinds, helping them navigate all the complexities of their lives as they move through college. And so I really took that kind of holistic approach to working with students and did my best to get everybody on our staff to do the same.
Oh, wow. Well, and I think that's the key is the holistic aspect rather than just the focus on the academic. And that is one of the benefits of, our higher education system. And you went from a small liberal arts school to a much larger school. So how did you find that transition?
Boy, I could spend the whole hour talking about that. That was a very, very large transition. Having spent really my entire career at Carleton, it was really moving to a completely different kind of institution and a very different scale. Um, there were a lot of things about Carleton that I missed, truthfully, in that larger research institution kind of environment. But I also had wonderful colleagues and, of course, terrific students that I worked with. And there were lots of opportunities. I mean, Stanford is a very different place. As many people will know, being in the middle of Silicon Valley, it's a place
Mhm.
where computer science kind of reigns supreme. Everybody wants to be in computer science or some related field, pretty much, it seems like. And so getting students to think broadly about the purpose of their education, like I'm not here just to get a job. I'm actually maybe here to get an education that will shape my life and shape my future more broadly. Getting students to think that way was an uphill climb, let me put it that way. And so that was really that was really my mission, was to help use the advising program to get students to reflect on their education more. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little later in this conversation as well. But that was really one of the major shifts. That was not a hard push at Carleton, but it was at Stanford.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Yeah, and you're always fitting into a culture or helping to mold that culture, shape that culture. It sounds like you made quite a contribution. With your work with students in that area, what were the areas that you found that they needed the most support or that they were less prepared? In what ways did you discover that?
Right. So I would say I would answer that question in a couple of ways. It's been my experience over the years that every student, particularly students who are attending selective schools like Carleton and Stanford, come with a lot of assets. They come with a lot of background. They've obviously done well in high school, or they wouldn't even have been admitted. So you're already starting with a group of students who are pretty highly motivated and pretty successful. In the case of Stanford, extremely successful, right? Um, and even then, right, students are still 17, 18 years old, more or less. When they start, they're still in formation in a whole lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
They are out on their own for the first time, many of them living away from home, making new decisions about who they want to socialize with and how. Any university, any university in the country, is going to have a far broader set of academic opportunities than any high school does, right? So there are going to be
Right.
departments and subjects that students have certainly never studied in high school.
Right.
So there are opportunities to grow and to develop new interests. So what, one of the challenges is getting students to move beyond the very narrow focused, like I know what I'm interested in, I know what I'm good at, I'm just going to stick to that. That's my comfort zone, into, well, maybe there are opportunities here to grow and learn and expand your horizons. And you might discover a new passion. In fact, many students do in college discover a new passion.
Yep.
Students discover that the thing that they thought they were interested in is not everything that was cracked up to be, and so on, right? So there are a lot of ways in which students change, and they're not always anticipating that. They expect that college is going to somehow be just a straightforward continuation of high school. If they did well in high school, they're set to do well in college. And as I said, that's not true generally for two reasons. One, because the opportunities are greater, the environment is richer, it's more complicated institution to navigate, and in addition to that, the strategies that they used in high school, study strategies and so forth, to succeed may or may not cut it in
Right.
college. Faculty demand more of students in college courses than the average high school teacher does in those courses. So students are often shocked to discover that they get their first B, or God forbid, even a C, right, in college, and they're freaking out because they just have never seen those grades before, and then they have a crisis of confidence and they don't know how to rebound and so forth. So there are all of these issues that students are not really they're not prepared for a lot of that, right, in this transition from high school to college. And that's really part of why I wrote this book, which I began to think about really late in my teaching career at Carleton. And I'll spare you all the story that I tell in the beginning of the book about how I came to write the book. But fundamentally, it's simply that it dawned on me, sort of belatedly, that a lot of even very good college students haven't really thought deeply about learning. They haven't
Right.
really thought about what learning entails. Um, they haven't thought about how to think critically. I mean, they know how to do their work well, but that doesn't mean that they have really internalized the intellectual skills that college is attempting to teach them. And then it became clear to me that, I don't think I was ever explicit with students about what those skills were either in all the years that I was teaching. I had never really sat down and said, okay, this is how you, when I say think critically about this, here's what I'm asking you to do. Here's how you operationalize that. Right? So the book is really, how do you operationalize critical thinking? What is it that really entails? How do you do it? What does it look like on assignments when you're being asked to do these things? So it felt to me like students really need a handbook for how to think critically, because they don't just learn it by osmosis, and they don't automatically know it just because they got into a good college.
Right.
So that's really what drove me to write the book, and my purpose is to have a book that's really accessible and very sort of user friendly for students as they begin college.
I love that. I love that. And that is so true. And sometimes as parents or educators, we often and students themselves assume, oh, because you did well in high school, then you got into this, competitive college, or even if it's not a competitive college, that it's just more of the same. Um, One of the things I was involved in for many years was the program AVID, which stands for Advancement via Individual Determination. And that's one of the things that really set the AVID program apart. We're bringing in underrepresented students, first generation students, and many students coming from not only just first generation, but first generation in the US. And so the AVID program identified early on exactly what you're talking about, that students need to learn to be students. And so we taught that no one teaches students how to take Cornell notes, how to manage the calendar, how to back map. Okay, I've got this assignment due, and now I've got to plan for that. We just assume they're going to learn this by osmosis. And I remember, and I've shared this story before, but I had a conversation with a director of Brown. years ago. And we had a young man from a Hispanic community in Fresno who had been accepted to Brand. He was the very first one to go there. And I wasn't worried about his academic preparation because he had gone through the AVID program, but I was more worried about the cultural. So I was asking the dean of admissions, like, do you have, these cultural groups or organizations or things that he can join? And he was telling me all about, oh, we have the bridge program, we do this, we do that. He'll be academically prepared. He'd come early. I was like, wait, wait, wait. You think he's not academically prepared? He's gone through the AVID program and explained a little bit about the program to him in preparing him to be a student. And that's what you and I are talking about today.
Right.
And he looked at me and he said, does Harvard know about this? Does Yale know about this? These are the students we want.
Yeah.
And this is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more. So this book, we're going to have it on my show notes and everything. So you said it's a handbook.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, it's a book I tried to write very much in the way that I talked to students all those years when I was teaching. So I never counted, but there must have been hundreds of times when a student walked into my office during office hours after I had given back a set of papers or tests or something, and said some version of I don't understand why I got a B minus or a C on this paper. If I had turned this in high school, I'm sure I would have gotten an A or something close to an A. I'm not complaining. I just don't understand. I just don't.
Right.
What was it that you wanted me to do that I didn't do?
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my opportunity to sort of sit with them and go, okay, so let's look at what you wrote and let's look at what I was asking you to write. Let's look back at the prompt. Let's look at what you produced. And almost invariably, I discovered and helped them try to see, like, okay, so just recounting what you read in your own words or paraphrasing it doesn't really answer any question, right?
Right. Right.
That, I wanted you to analyze it. I wanted you to synthesize it. I wanted you to extrapolate from it. I'll be talking about all these things in just a moment when I get to some of my slides. But fundamentally, there were higher order levels of thinking that they hadn't done, right? And that they didn't really know how to do. It became clear to me at some point that saying to a student, analyze this passage from something we read, like they weren't sure what I was asking them to do. And so this was a way the book became a way of sort of saying, okay, let me talk you through what that means. Here are
Mm-hmm.
some of the kinds of things that that might mean, and here's some of the ways you might do that. And so I really wrote the book as a very much hands-on, um, like first of all, it's in a very conversational style. It's written to students, right, in second person. But besides that, it has interactive exercises. It has questions for reflection to get students to think a little bit about the material in each chapter. And it's very much sort of close to the ground. I mean, it's not like a high level, abstract. This is what learning is. It's very much here is what critical thinking looks like when it's being done well, and here are some of the ways that you do that. And I test drove this, of course, with lots of colleagues of mine and with whole groups of students at Stanford and elsewhere. And I basically said, look, what are the things you learned about how to learn once you got here and had been here for a year or two that you wished you'd known when you first started, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I let them guide me in terms of what they really felt they hadn't gotten until somebody helped them figure it out. One example being a student who said to me, a Stanford student who said to me, I thought history was just names and dates and places and events. And I only realized when I got into a history course at Stanford that it's not that at all. That's just the stuff. But the real stuff of a history course is why did these things happen? Why did this happen before that did? Why didn't, someone make some different decision along the way that turned the course of events in the way that it did? Like it's all about making sense of history, not just knowing the details. Right. But nobody had ever told him that in high school. That's not what he was prepared for in history
Right.
classes in college.
Right.
Right. So those are examples, right, of the kinds of things that I wanted to introduce students to help them understand what are academic disciplines? What does that mean when somebody, you walk into a class in linguistics, which you've almost certainly never taken in high school. How do
Exactly.
you get yourself oriented to a whole new discipline, a whole new field of study? Right? Nobody tells you how to do that. So this book
Right.
does. So these are some of the things that I try to cover to give students the guideposts. I like to say at a certain point, it's like their GPS. It's like the GPS for how to navigate college academically. It doesn't include stuff about how to get along with your roommate or how to manage your time well, or there are a lot of other books that do that. But
Yeah, that's
it really focuses on the academic dimension of college work, which of course is what you're mostly going to college for. Uh,
exactly. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about the beginning part of that. And one of the things, in our previous conversations, learning that there are tools and resources that we as college advisors sometimes don't know about that can be really important in assessing a good fit. We're all about a good fit and what that looks like, but trying to define that sometimes is pretty nebulous. So let's go ahead and have you share your slides and let's dive into that a little bit. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Let me just begin by saying, and I'll start sharing my screen here. It'll take me a second to get to the right screen and move to here. Let me go back. Hold on. Here we go. Okay. Um, so the first part of this presentation really is not about the book at all. It grows out of my years of experience just being in higher education. And of course, having my own children who went to college and now graduated already years ago. But that said, realizing that the average parent who's looking with their kids at all the opportunities, all the options, trying to figure out where to send their kid to school, often don't look at the things that I think really matter.
Mhm.
And so I've done this presentation or versions of it now with IECs. I've done it with high school parents in a variety of settings. And here's where I always begin. When you're selecting a college, you're going to spend a lot of money, right? This may be the most expensive decision, maybe short of buying a house, the most expensive decision that parents are going to make. And I always begin by asking parents, so what do you think you're actually buying with all this money? And I suspect that the answer that first comes to mind for most parents is, well, it's like buying anything it's like buying an expensive car or a house or something like that. It's a very expensive version of buying a new dishwasher or refrigerator. It's a commodity, and you're buying a very expensive commodity. And that's why you want to look at the equivalent of Consumer Reports, which is to say something like US News and World Report rankings, to try to determine like what the best commodity is, i.e., what's the best college, right? And my first point that I always make is this: you're really not buying a commodity. You are not buying a commodity at all. You're actually buying a set of relationships. I'm going to say that again because it's critical to everything I'm going to be saying in this whole first part of the presentation. You are buying a set of relationships, relationships with faculty, relationships with other students that your student will be going to college with, living with, working with, learning from, socializing with, and so on. Those relationships, the quality of those relationships is what makes an education worthwhile in a whole range of ways, right? And it's also what makes it a college education very difficult to assess up front. How do you determine the quality of the relationships your student is going to have at a particular institution versus some other institution? That's a very hard thing to try to figure out. But there are some metrics that I think matter, and we'll get to them in a moment. But so that's the first, and I think the most important point is just reorienting people to it's all about relationships, folks. It's not about buying a commodity. There's something called the Coordinated Institutional Research Program, which is a survey of entering college students. It's been done for decades. Millions of students literally have taken this survey over the years. Many people don't even know that it exists. You can get the results of these surveys online if you go looking for them. But let me just show you some statistics from this survey over the decades. When students are asked why they're going to college, and they rank, different sets of criteria based on very important, little important, not important at all, and so forth. To get a better job, back in 1976, that was the percentage of students who said that was very important to them. In 1999, in 2015, and the most recent year for which I could find this data, in 2019. Look at how that has risen. And to make more money, similarly, from 1971 to 99 to 2015, and now up to 86, almost 90% in 2019. And I'd be willing to bet that in the 6 years since then, it's, if anything, probably gone up even more. What matters to college students? Another one of the questions that's asked on this survey. Is it essential or very important to be well off financially? Look at that number and how it goes up over time. And then develop a meaningful philosophy of life. Look at this number in 1967 and how that number drops. Levels off some, but still just under 50% at this point from having been upwards of 85%. So these are markers, I think, of the attitude that students bring with them to college. Why are they going to college? What are they hoping to get out of college? Right? That's who we're working with, and I think it's important for us to remember that. Um, and so the first thing I say to students and their parents is, let's think more expansively about college. It's about getting a job, no doubt. It's about making money. We all want a return on our investment. It's a lot of money to invest in college. You don't want to get out of college and end up driving a cab, which you could have done without spending all that money. Right? On the other hand, there are a lot of other things involved here. You're gaining cultural capital, which is to say you're learning about the world and you're gaining some understanding of certain key important things, historical things, cultural things that have happened that give you kind of touch points for talking um, with expertise about a variety of things. There's networking. As we like to say, it's not just what you know, it's who you know. And who you know often opens doors for you to opportunities, to jobs, but also to other ways of looking at the world. You're acquiring life skills of sorts that will be very useful to you, no matter what you do, no matter what kind of job you have. These skills that you need in order to get through college. You were referring to some of them earlier, Cyndy, managing your time as you're preparing for a big project that has to be turned in and you have to do it in stages over a period of 2 months, right? That requires a certain kind of skill, right? And you learn that in college, hopefully. Discovering a sense of purpose. There are people, William Damon is a key figure in this field at School of Education here at Stanford, who studied the acquisition of a sense of purpose among college students over the decades. And this is a very important part of the college experience for many students. They're trying to figure out who they are and how they plug into the world and what they want to do with their lives fundamentally, right? And especially, and this does now come to things that I talk about more directly in the book, becoming an expert learner and a rigorous thinker. And why do I emphasize that one? There are really a couple of reasons. Many surveys, including surveys of Fortune 500 CEOs, have demonstrated that this is what employers mostly say they want. They don't want college students to come out who know exactly what this job is going to require them to do. They figure they can learn that on the job. They want students who know how to think, who know how to express themselves clearly, who know how to work together with other people, who know how to navigate difference, and all of those things, right? This is high on their list of things that they look for. Moreover, it's what our society needs. I don't need to go into a lot of political commentary here to just simply say it's a fact that there's a lot of disinformation out there on the web. Let's put it that way. A lot of conspiracy theories floating around on social media. Right? We need students, we need citizens who can distinguish real factual information from nonsense, right? And that's one of the things that critical thinking helps you do. And finally, it's the most enduring and transferable benefit of a college education. If you think about it, you really want students who not just know how to get a job, one particular job out of college. You want to have students who have learned the skills of thinking and learning and criticizing and analyzing that will serve them well in jobs that don't even exist yet, right? In things that may show up a decade or two down the road that they will be prepared for if they have used their college education well, right? So these are some of the things that I try to help students and their families really think much more expansively about what college is truly all about. I summarize that really with this slide in which I say, if you think about your college education as a path to a job, there's again nothing wrong with a job. I don't want to in any way disparage that. But it's a little bit like saying, I want to go to Pittsburgh. Maybe that's a job with Facebook or somebody, right? And I'm gonna use my college education as a plane ticket to get to Pittsburgh. And that's fine. And you get to Pittsburgh and you have a job, right? Or you get to your destination. But fundamentally, you can only use that ticket once, and it will only take you to one place. And that's why when you get to Pittsburgh, you throw away your plane ticket because it's used up. But if you think instead of your education not as a plane ticket, but as a passport, think about that. It takes you to any destination, including places you may not even have ever thought about going before, right? And it's not a one-use item. You use it again and again and again. And even when it expires, it's renewable. And so you put that old one away in a drawer, probably somewhere, so that you can someday take it out and look at all the stamps from all the places you went when you used your passport to go to far-flung destinations. Right? A passport is a document that's usable. It's a lifelong document, right? And it's personalized. It has your picture in it and your personal information in it in the way that a plane ticket doesn't. So I encourage students and their families to really think about their education as a passport and not just a plane ticket. And when you think about it that way, it opens up a whole new vista of opportunities for how to use these 4 years. Okay, so this one I'll run through quickly because I think these are likely to be things that many of you here in the audience are already aware of. But I say them in part because so often when people are looking at a decision about where to send their kids to college, they get swayed by things that I think ultimately don't matter very much. So here are some of the things to ignore. The quality of the campus tour. I can tell you from personal experience, my oldest son, when he was looking at colleges, went on one particular tour. I will not tell you at what school. And the tour guide was dreadful, dreadful. And he walked away from that experience going, I'm not coming here. Right? But of course, really, the quality of the tour had nothing to do with the quality of the education at the institution. It was just a bad tour guide. Right? Right. The glitziness of the PR materials, right? Which is to say, every school now spends a lot of money in promotion. Right? Ignore it. It's just advertising. The class or two that you visit, if you do a campus visit, this is one that many people think, oh, I'll not, now I'll really learn about the college. I'll have my kids sit in on a sample class. Well, I can tell you, I taught those classes. I had many, many prospective students and their parents sitting in on classes. Some days those classes went well, some days they went less well because that's the nature of teaching. And that didn't even give you an accurate read on the quality of my course, much less the quality of the whole institution. Right? So that's a random, completely you can't generalize from one or even two class visits, right? So keep that in mind, right? The quality of the food. People always laugh when I say this, right? But on virtually any campus tour that you're on, some parent or some kid is going to raise their hand and say, tell us about the quality of the food at the dining hall, right? And of course, you think about that for a minute. I don't know any college graduate who's ever looked back and said, boy, all that money was so worthwhile because I ate so well in college. It was the best food I ever ate. Right? It just that's not what you're going to remember about college, right? And especially ignore the US News and World Report rankings because again, they can give you there are all sorts of problems with them, but fundamentally, going back to my first slide, they will give you data about certain kinds of things, how big the endowment is and the number of students per faculty member and all sorts of other things. But they won't tell you about the quality of the experience your student is going to have. So here are some of the things that actually do matter, that do at least begin to get at what I think is most central, right? There's something called the National Survey of Student Engagement. This is a survey that's been given, it goes by the nickname Nessie in the field. People inside of higher education all know about Nessie. Many people outside of higher education have never heard of it. It's a survey, again, that's been given to millions of students over the years, and it asks all sorts of questions about their social life, about the quality of their engagement with their faculty, about how rigorous the academic work is, how often they have to write papers that are 5 pages or longer, about whether they've had conversations with faculty members outside of class. You name it, anything it's about student engagement is pretty much covered on this survey. Now, here's the hitch. You can't the survey results that you can find online are all aggregated across all the hundreds of thousands of students who take this survey every year. The institutions that administer the survey get reports about how their own students responded, but those are the proprietary, the property of the institution, and very few institutions make them public. I believe Earlham College does for one, and there may be others that you could find out there that do. But you would have to ask the institution for the results of their NESI survey to get this information that would enable you to really compare one school to another. But knowing that it exists is probably worthwhile. Similarly, this one is available online. This is their pocket guide with a whole list of very, very thoughtful questions that parents and students should be asking as they look at schools. These are the questions that really matter if you want to know what they are. Right? Faculty surveys. Again, as a faculty member, I took this. Again, it goes by the nickname Harry Higher Education Research Institute survey. This survey asks faculty all sorts of questions about their experience with students, with their colleagues, with the institution, what they have, how satisfied they are. I say to parents, if you're spending all this money sending your student to college, you want to make sure that the faculty teaching them are really happy, feel well supported, feel as though they're in an institution that's giving them the resources they need to do their jobs well. This is where you would find that information. Once again, I'm afraid it's not publicly available, but if I were looking at colleges, I would be asking the admissions people if they would reveal the results of their faculty survey. Right? There's something called the Collegiate Learning Assessment, which is an exam. You can learn more about it by looking at the book Academically Adrift. It's a survey a test really, which asks students questions that get at their ability to think critically. You would want to know if the school has administered the CLA and what kinds of scores their students got. Alumni surveys and rates of donation, right? There's no better indicator of the quality of experience that people have had in college than asking the alumni of that college what their experience was and how devoted are they to the school. And notice I said not the amount of money they give, but the rate of donation among alumni. Right? That's really an important indicator. A learning and teaching center. I mentioned that I ran the learning and teaching center at Carleton for a few years. These are important. This is an important center for faculty who are learning more and more about how to teach well and engage with students. The advising program, again, really something I care very deeply about, but every student at some point or another needs good advising. How robust that advising program is, how many students each advisor is assigned, how easy it is to get an appointment, all of these things matter to the quality of the experience that your student is going to have. First year seminar programs, civic engagement opportunities, off-campus study. Many studies have shown that these kinds of experiences have an outsized impact on the student's education. You want to know if these programs exist at the institution, how well supported they are, if students are required to do them or not, and so forth. These are all things that matter a great deal. Finally, I'll go through this one quickly. Avoid the major trap. A lot of students going to college think, well, I want to major in X, therefore I'm going to go to school Y, right? Because it has a great program in that particular field. Well, that's not necessarily a bad idea, but there are some potential downsides. One is that majors usually don't determine career paths. Lots of people are in careers that have nothing at all to do with what they majored in college. Because they learned how to think. And once they learned how to think and got opportunities, they went off in some other direction, which is what we expect to happen. Right? Moreover, students change majors often more than once. Students come in thinking they're going to major in something. And really, there are lots of different statistics. It's hard to get a read on this, but students really do change majors often repeatedly in college. Unless a student is very, very solidly committed to a particular field of study, like I mean somebody who has been committed to this since they were, 10 or 12 years old, it's usually not a great idea to pick a school just based on prospective major. And I always say to students, the best major for you is the one in which the one that you're most excited about and will do best in. Because at the end of the day, the specific of what you majored in matters less than your overall GPA, how well you got to know your faculty, what kinds of letters of recommendation they're going to write for you, and things like that. So this is all just a way of saying that when people are looking at colleges, they often think, I think, inordinately put weight on potential majors. This is a series of other questions to ask. I'm not even going to go through these. I'll just leave the slide up for a minute, and you can all take a look at them. I will simply underscore one here in the middle, which is health services. It's a pretty good bet that at some point in 4 years, maybe more than 4 years, your student is going to need health services. You want to know where the nearest hospital is. You want to know how well staffed the health services are on campus, and particularly mental health services, which increasing numbers of students need. So all of that to say, these are things you want to look into. U.S. News and World Reports does not have anything that will give you any of this information. These are all the reasons why those kinds of metrics don't matter, but these do. And then back to the question of fit. You had mentioned this earlier, Cyndy. When I think about fit, here are the things I think of, right? And this is why it's a little bit like it's about when I say it's about choosing a relationship, right? You're developing a relationship with the school, right? And it's like choosing a partner, right? So, what are your priorities when you're choosing a partner? What kind of student are you? What kind of environment do you thrive in? How adventurous or risk averse are you? And how competitive are you? These are all elements of the kind of person you are that I think matter a lot when you're looking at where do you want to spend 4 years of your life and who do you want to be with? And do you want to necessarily go to the most selective school that accepts you? Well, maybe not. You might get into that school and you might end up in the bottom third of your graduating class. Is that where you want to be? Maybe, or maybe not. Maybe you'd rather be in the top third of your graduating class, but be in a school that enables you to shine and is less competitive. So these are all important questions about fit. And as I always say, get over the prestige and bragging rights. I confess I have not read this article from the Wall Street Journal. I simply saw the notice about it. The notion that we should be worried about how to get our 11-year-old into Harvard is just, I think, symptomatic of how crazy people are about, a very, very tiny number of very, very high prestige selective schools, right? You can get an outstanding education at all sorts of places. This is just a short list. I like to keep a list of famous people who've gone to schools that are not standout top 10 Ivy League schools or anything close to them, right? So all that to say, you can succeed and be wildly famous and never have gone to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Stanford or any of the other schools that everybody's clamoring to get into. So keep that in mind. And keep this in mind too, from that same NESE survey that I mentioned earlier, when students are asked about their overall educational experience and whether they would choose to go to that school again, overwhelmingly, 70 to 80%, right, of students say yes, they would go to that school again, and their overall education has been good or excellent. So if you think about that, right, no matter where a student ends up, overwhelmingly they're happy where they are, right? And they feel good about it. So that should also lower the pressure on this whole craziness about getting into the most, right, competitive and elite schools. Okay, transitioning from high school to college. This is now shifting to a different piece, and I'm going to try to move through this quickly in the interest of time. But as I mentioned earlier, that transition from high school to college level learning is often more difficult than students expect, and here are the reasons why. Again, I'm not going to read the slides. It's pretty straightforward, I think. But here are just my quick and dirty sort of comparisons between high school learning and college learning. And as you look them over, some of these will probably resonate with you from your time in college and things that you realized only after you got to school that really high school was a very different animal. Learning in high school was mostly about absorbing information that other people gave you and then spitting it back accurately. And in college, it's much more about self-directed learning. It's much more about discovering the questions that are important and then pursuing them on your own. It's about constructing knowledge, not just absorbing knowledge, and so forth. And these are all major shifts. This is why I like to say college is really not just an extension of high school. And then there are these elements of critical thinking, and this is really central to the book and things that, again, most students are not prepared for. I'd like to say there are really only four basic elements of what you need to do in college to do well academically, right? You need to be able to explore context, compare alternatives, weigh evidence, and then find implications and new applications of things you've learned. I've tested this out, by the way, by looking at hundreds of college assignments and coding them for what kinds of questions are being asked. and checking this out with colleagues about what, in fact, faculty do ask students to know how to do. And so far, in talking to hundreds of faculty, right, nobody has yet come up with anything they expect students to do that doesn't fall under one of these four headings. So here's what they look like. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. Exploring context can be a lot of different kinds of things. Comparing alternatives, likewise, alternative ways of testing things, alternative explanations. Weighing evidence. This one is especially important to distinguish fact from fiction that I alluded to earlier. And finally, finding implications and new applications of things that they have already learned that was presented in the textbook or in the lectures that they heard and so forth. These are the things that often trip up students, especially at the beginning of their college career, because they get to college, they get an exam, and it doesn't ask them exactly a question that looks like anything they've seen before. It asks them a question that they can only answer well if they can extrapolate from what they learned in class and then apply it to some new set of data or some, new setting that they haven't been exposed to. That's the real test of whether you've learned it or not, right? And that's a whole different level of learning than most students have been asked to do in high school. So these are the things that I point to that help students make that transition from high school to college. And here's just the very last piece of what I'll talk about now, and then we'll just open this up for conversation. But lots of parents, will feel like they just don't know exactly how to support their students through this time. And here are some of the things that I underscore. I say this again as a parent of former college students, and also as somebody who's worked with students and knows kind of what they're going through and has talked to them about what their parents are doing to be helpful and sometimes what their parents are not doing that would be helpful, right? So, taking initiative, normalizing struggle and even failure. Very few people get through college with straight A averages. By and large, you struggle sometimes with something. It may be academic, it may be social, it may be something else. This is normal. Encourage seeking help. I can't emphasize this one enough. Many students didn't need a lot of help in high school. They get to college, they're on their own. It's more challenging. The environment is very different. How do you help them? You help them by encouraging them to seek help and normalize that looking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's actually a sign of strength and resilience. Fostering critical thinking, which you can do even when they're still in high school or even earlier. um, Helping them set their own goals, and letting go of your goals for them to the extent that they're developing their own goals is also a very important part of this transition. Resisting the urge, right, to be a helicopter or snowplow, as we sometimes say, right, getting out of their way, letting them fall. How many of you, had students at one time or another learning how to ride a bike? You didn't ride behind them all the time to make sure they wouldn't fall. At some point, you'd let them go off on their own and ride their bike, and maybe they did fall. And they, lo and behold, they got up again and they figured it out and they got back on their bikes and kept going. That's what we're encouraging. We want to encourage students to know how to stumble and pick themselves up again. And of course, connecting with campus resources, which is a part of seeking help. So I'm going to stop there and quit sharing and just sort of say I hope this was helpful, but I'm open to thoughts or questions or anything that may have come in while I was sharing all of that.
Well, you covered a lot of different things, and you're singing to the choir, right? But it's so nice to have for us as counselors and advisors working with students and families, and to have your voice to be able to reiterate the things that we're being trying to share and say. And I wanted to emphasize some of the points you made. First of all, one of the questions we have is, where is your book available? How do they get a copy of your book?
You can find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or probably anywhere else that you go looking. Any online bookseller should be able to get it for you. I also have copies myself. People can write me, but it's probably easier to actually do it more quicker and easier for you to do it directly with whoever you buy your books from. So.
Yeah, and Anne had a question at the very beginning. You made a reference to IBCs.
IECs.
Oh, us.
Yeah,
Oh,
you.
okay.
Yeah, sorry if I said that too
Okay.
quickly.
All
Yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah. I
We're wondering, it's like liberal arts
independent
colleges,
independent educational
education
consultants, right?
consultants.
All of you know who those are. So yeah, no, sorry if I
Okay.
spoke.
Well, and I want to go back to one of your last points about giving roles to parents. That's one of the things we as advisors often struggle with because parents can be those helicopter, snowplow, Velcro, all sorts of different names, but giving them tasks that they can do that are very beneficial and helping them to be able to build that resilience, that grit with their children. And some of us are able to work with parents early on and help them start doing those kinds of things. So, are there other things that you have found that work well in that arena? Ways, because it is hard for a parent. All of a sudden, you take your child, drop them off. You can't even talk to anybody, sometimes. And so that can be quite a daunting thing, speaking also as a parent of children. So what have you found that's effective in that way?
Right. Well, I'll just say a couple of things. One is that I used to do presentations during New Student Week at Stanford with one of my colleagues in the School of Education, where during New Student Week, the days when the parents were dropping their first year students off, there was a program specifically just for the parents, and I co-led that program. And basically, we were talking through uh, sort of sample scenarios, like what happens when you get this tearful message from your kid. I got my first C. I'm freaking out. I don't know what to do. I'm sure I don't belong here. I must have gotten in by mistake. Blah blah blah. Whatever. How do you respond? Right? Or maybe you're accustomed to texting with your kid every day or twice a day, and all of a sudden 4 days goes by and you haven't heard from them, and you don't know what to do, and you're afraid of what might be going on with them, and yeah, so like how do you like there are all of these sort of changes in the relationship between parents and students when they go off to college and just preparing parents for that. So I think, one of the things that schools need to be doing is helping with that transition and preparing parents for that. And I think, frankly, high school counselors and IECs could be helping parents prepare for that major
Yeah.
transition. The other thing I'll say is and here it is very similar to IUCs. Like there are a lot of times when a parent doesn't want to be like looking over their kid's shoulder, day after day, week after week. Are you getting your essays written? Have you filled out your applications yet? Have you blah blah blah? But you don't want to be in that role. It's not good for your relationship with your kids, right? You hire someone in part because you want someone who can actually like do that and you can trust them to help guide your student through this really very stressful and pretty complicated process, right? Similarly, when you get to college, you might well want someone to be there to work with your student to help them through all of the things that they're going to deal with so that, when they call you freaking out, you can say, have you talked to your college coach? Which is why I do this work. I love working with college students and I make myself available precisely because I know that parents often want the reassurance of knowing that there's somebody paying attention to what's going on with their kids once they're off in school. And as good as advisors can be, they usually have hundreds of students that they're responsible for. And the likelihood that you're going to get a lot of personalized attention from your academic advisor in college is really a long shot, right?
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
that's a kind of service that I think many parents would find useful, and that's another way in which you can kind of help parents know that they can let go because there is somebody there paying attention, and they don't have to deal with all of the conflicts that have arisen in the context of their relationship with their own children in the middle of this. So.
That's very true. And that's one of the things that we often, will share with parents. I know I've had that conversation many times. Like, I will become the nag so you don't have to. So you can preserve that relationship, especially when it's, as a high school senior, it's the last year they're going to be home. And you really want to have that be a very special, memorable experience. And then when you go to college, you need having that assurance that okay, there is somebody that you can turn to that you can really connect with and can help you out. That's why I mean, we've seen a big growth of executive functioning coaching, but the coaching you're doing is slightly different. So tell us how that's a little different.
Well, it encompasses things like I certainly talk to
Mhm.
students about executive functioning and time management and study skills and all of those things. Um, More often, what's at stake is students are just very anxious, or they're struggling socially to find their place, or they're trying to figure out what they're interested in, or they simply want somebody who can be a sounding board as they're making decisions, and somebody who can say to them, "Okay, here, let's develop some questions that we want to work on and think about this semester." And then I'll check in with you periodically. You'll do a little bit of journaling about it. You'll share that with me. At the end of the semester, we'll have another conversation about it. We'll talk about how have you done? How have you grown? What have you learned? What are your goals for next semester? How are you going to build on the things that you just learned this semester? Right? These are having somebody that basically is there to sort of just be your, well, like coach, like just your partner as you move through your education. I often say to parents, a lot of students, and I think even very talented students, kind of sleepwalk through college. They know what they need to do.
Mhm.
They can check off all the boxes, but they're not really reflecting on what this experience is all about and how they're using it to best advantage. And having a coach, in addition to helping them when they're actually struggling, can just help them make sure that they're getting their money's worth out of what is, in fact, a very expensive investment in their future. Right? So that's what college coaching encompasses, really, kind of that whole spectrum of things. What it doesn't include is it does not include subject-specific tutoring. I can't help anybody with their, trigonometry or their physics homework or whatever. And it doesn't include psychological counseling, right? There are people who are experts in this, and I'm not, right? I can recommend that students pursue that if it feels to me like, from my experience, this is something that would be useful, but I don't offer that service. But I can be there to just kind of look at what's happening with the student holistically as they move through college and just kind of give them that support and advice.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Transition has always been something emphasize strongly in my work as a counselor and advisor and in my work in my UCLA classes. I think this is one area that we can strengthen and do more. I always tell my students, I don't want to just get you out of high school. I want to get you into college and I want you to be successful once you're there. And so my services have always gone through the freshman year of college for that exact reason. Because you do find students, they hit a brick wall, they get homesick, they want to transfer, and I've had many, many parents who was like, I'm so glad we still have that relationship. So, building those relationships, either that go from high school on to college or being able to build a new relationship like with what you offer is really important. And going back to just what you said earlier, choosing a relationship with a college is key. But I want to reemphasize one of the things you said too, Louis, is that it's not the school enthusiasm, the whole reason and the motivation to be there. Students will can do well at any number of colleges, and so I love the statistics that you shared, and having that kind of data is really key. Well, we are like almost out of time. So if somebody wants to learn more or reach out to you, how do they do that?
Right. I will put my email in the chat, but it is, excuse me, there's also on my website. I think it is in the program notes. Um, happy to hear from folks with questions. I will just mention quickly that I also, in addition to working with students once they're in college in this ongoing way that I've been talking about, I do a sort of a pre-college prep boot camp that I call Ready, Set, Think, which is based on the book in four sessions. It really ramps students up academically to do the work that they're going to be doing in college. And I also now offer a service that I call College Launchpad, which is essentially an extended survey that students complete that gives me a sense of how well prepared they are on a whole different set, many different metrics to make that transition to college. And then I meet with the student and parents if they want, and provide them with some guidance about how to make this transition successful. So that's another service that I offer. You can find all of that on the website. Again, happy to talk individually with anybody who would like to do that. But it's been a pleasure. Thank you again, Cyndy, for inviting me to share these resources with folks. And I hope this has been useful.
Oh, it's totally been useful. And we always love resources. That's kind of like our bread and butter. So thank you for being here and taking time out of your summer. And thank you, everybody. I have the best audience, as you can tell. And I really appreciate everybody being here. Next week, we're going to be August. I have a few sessions in August. We're going to talk about inclusive college counseling with Greg Zeiser and from Elon University, and Stefano Papaleo from Lynn University. During this time of, a lot of shifts in the world of higher education and diversity and equity, we're going to talk about what that looks like on an ongoing basis. And then on the 15th, we're going to talk about politics in college and how to navigate that. And I have a whole panel from CTCL schools, Christine Bowman from Southwestern, Kathy Finks from the College of Worcester, Lauren Rhodes from Lauren Sefton from Rhodes College. Sorry about that. We're going to talk about navigating politics. And then also, I have a former student. The end of August, August 22nd, John Durante, he just finished. He's a principal in New York City. He is a podcaster. He's written a book as well. But he's talked to top deans, and he's going to share some tips that he's learned from talking to all these deans. So that's the roundout for August. And so join me in the next few weeks. And as always, you can always register, and I'll always send you the link. So Louis, thank you again for being here today. And thank you, everybody, for being here. You can always reach out to me as well at cindymcdonald.com. And all the links to the registrations for the upcoming Friday forums are in my website. Just remember, my name's spelled with two Y's, not just one. Okay. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. Talk to you again soon. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.